Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Radio Sofia. Radio Sofia is a virtual platform to discuss socio-economic and political issues. Today, we have with us Professor Lekha Chakrabarty from National Institute of Public Finance and Policy to discuss with us the idea of gender budgeting as fiscal innovation. She is also affiliated as Research Associate with the Levy Economics Institute of Bard College, New York. Her areas of interest includes macroeconomics, public economics, and gender. She is also the author of the book Fiscal Consolidation, Budget Deficits, and Macroeconomy. We are lucky to have Professor Chakraborty to discuss with us the idea of gender budgeting, as she is the pioneer economist in institutionalizing gender budgeting in India with Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India in 2004. From what I understand, gender budgeting is making the entire budgetary exercise more responsive to gender issues. I find this topic particularly relevant given the pandemic. All of us have been reading about how the implications of pandemic is not gender neutral and how pandemic can reinforce the pre-existing gender inequality in labor force participation rates and employment in India. Looking forward to an enriching talk and discussion on these issues. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's a great initiative by the students of economics of, Institute of Management, Calcutta. And congratulations for this initiative because these are extraordinary times. So the value of a radio or a broadcasting like this, I completely, understand the significance of a broadcasting medium like this in the times of pandemic. And if you ask me, even before my dreams began as an economist, I always wanted to explore the art of broadcasting, and I wanted to do something related to broadcasting, because when I was a student, BBC was something which influenced my mind. So thank you so much, and thank you so much for this initiative. And let me come to the topic. Himadri asked me to talk about, gender budgeting as a policy initiative, or how it can be, visualized as a fiscal innovation. So I agree to him that I will talk about 45 minutes, and then we open the floor, and I look forward to a rich interactive session. Why it is called a fiscal innovation? Like any other innovation, gender budgeting, the process in India and abroad, it has passed through 4 distinct phases. The first is like the knowledge building or the knowledge networking. And each country articulated what is gender budgeting within a broad framework suiting to their country context. And after identifying the models, the next phase was institutional mechanisms. Because for any good academic or a theoretical model needs good institutional mechanisms or institutional design to translate it into a public policy initiative. So what are those kind of, institutional mechanisms or institutional design we require to translate this theoretical thing to a public policy was the next phase. The third was capacity building. After identifying the proper institutional mechanisms and analytical matrices, the next step is the capacity building. Here, the exercise is not just confined to the national level, it is also extended to the subnational level. So state capacity was identified as one of the crucial determinant for this exercise to be successful. And the fourth phase was, monitoring, evaluation, and accountability. So gender budgeting is both a tool of accounting and accountability. So it doesn't stop at the level of accounting. It's also a tool of accountability. So let me take you through all these 4 phases, and I will also explain to you how different countries interpret it. A few countries we can take and discuss. And for the first time ever, IMF asked its member nations in 2006-2007 to integrate gender budgeting in the public financial management. And, that was a time in which UN Secretary General's high-level panel identified gender budgeting as a policy tool to ensure women's economic empowerment. So the subject reached world stage only in 2016-17. But if we look at the individual country experiences, in India, we began this process in 2000. In 2000, that's a year in which I joined NIPFP. That time, director, on the first day of my joining, he told me that he gave me the terms of reference of a new project, and that's on gender budgeting. And he asked me that so far in this institute, we have not taken up any projects on gender. This is going to be the first experiment ever in our country. And we have not yet articulated how a gender lens can be applied to the fiscal policy. So this is going to be the first project, and you're going to work with me. So that was a beginning. And there was no model in front how to interpret or how to articulate or to build, a model in which we can incorporate gender into the fiscal policy framework. And, after identifying the proper policy tools, initially, this exercise was confined to just the expenditure side. And if the exercise is just confined to the expenditure side, just one moment, I'll have a little water. Okay, initially the concern was that it was just confined to the expenditure side. So on the tax side, it was very tough to apply the gender lens, but exercise began from the expenditure side. In the process, in the budget making process, the first step is budget call circular. So if something is mandated, it's not exactly legally. If something is mandated through the call circular, then all the sectoral ministries are committed to do that thing. So gender budgeting was initiated as a within government initiative in India, from that call circular process. In the call circular, if you look into the call circular, you can see one of the clauses is like you have to do gender budgeting of your sectoral allocation when you present your demand for grants. And next step is all the sectoral ministries identify the intensity of the gender allocations, in their particular sector, and put forth that statement to the Ministry of Finance. So this is collated in two different ways. One is like, what are the specifically targeted programs you have in your particular sector on gender? Second is, in the mainstream spending, what are the intrinsic gender components you need to identify? After this, Ministry of Finance, there was a gender budgeting secretariat at the Ministry of Finance level, and they collate all this information from the sectoral ministries and put forward the gender budget statement. So that's a kind of accounting process. So first is call circular. The second is a gender budget statement. Then, things are more or less transparent and accountable, or the first step of accountability is this transparency, that how much of the entire budget a government spends on women or men. For that matter, we have to incorporate even the transgender concerns. So that's gender budgeting. It's not exclusively for women alone. Why the exercise is getting skewed towards women? Because when you do the gender diagnosis exercise, you can look into all the indicators related to health, education, workforce participation, governance, all the indicators. If you look at, you can see that women and men are at the different levels in the socio-economic scale. And this striking asymmetry gets into the budget unless we correct for it. So you can argue that prima facie, a budget is a gender neutral document. Why do you want to apply a gender lens over there? As the women and men, they are at the asymmetric levels in the socio-economic scale. Unless you correct these, the concerns in the budget, it turns to be gender blind. That gender neutrality can turn gender blind. So that was a concern. And from the equity perspective, from the equality perspective, as well as efficiency perspective, gender budgeting is quite a powerful tool, because integrating gender is efficient for the economy. Integrating gender lens into the fiscal policy, that's a kind of a tool to ensure equality. So it's a kind of accountability mechanism in which we can tackle the built-in inequalities. So that's a concern. Of course, from the human rights perspective, if you look at, it's a rights-based initiative as well. And in our country, there are many rights-based initiatives in the social sector. For instance, we have employer of last resort policy in India, which is a Manrega policy, ensuring or guaranteeing a limited number of days in which you guarantee employment for the men and women. And also we have right to education. So these policies are rights-based policy. And from the legal perspective, these came forward in terms of, if you have a problem, it's a public interest litigation. So it's like you are guaranteeing 100 days or more than 100 days of job to a person. But if you're not giving a 100 days guaranteed job to a person, then it's a public interest rate litigation. So that's the legal route in which the employer of last resort policy was floated in the country. But gender budgeting or the climate responsive budgeting, these are not public interest rate litigation as the legal tools which were ensured in the country. Rather, these are, legal within the public, the public financial management framework. So this was floated from the public financial management framework rather than as a public interest litigation. So that's a basic difference between the other social sector policies, like the employer of last resort policy, floated as Mandriga or the rights to education or anything. Now comes the question, do we really require a legal mandate to ensure that gender budgeting will be successful as a public policy? This question is open because it's there in the budget circular, it's mandated. So if you ask me, strictly it's a law, it's a kind of a law within public financial management. But I can make it more clear if I explain to you what has happened in Korea. In Korea, there is a national finance law. Within the national finance law, the clauses related to gender budgeting were incorporated as articles. So it's not just at the financial allocations level, it was taken to the outcomes level. So all these articles related to gender budgeting were incorporated in the national finance law. So when I talk about the legal mandate for gender budgeting, I think I am more skewed towards, a legal mandate within the financial laws, not as a public interest litigation. And if you look at the Philippines example, in Philippines, gender and development, there's a budget, GAD budget they call, it was legally mandated one. So gender budgeting in Philippines was legally mandated as an earmarking. You earmark 5% of all the developmental sectors for gender-related programs. So this earmarking of 5% can get things marginalized to just 5% of entire budget. It can be considered as an upper bound. That's a danger. Or, even in the initial stages, this 5% of the entire program budget of a department, they could not come up with innovative schemes or programs how they have to spend the 5% on gender related things. So identifying an innovative or a critical program related to gender, that was at another concern. So it was an initiative by the National Filipino Women's Missionary, but not exactly a mandate from the Ministry of Finance. But in India, what has happened is Ministry of Finance, has a lead role. If you look at the experiences across the Commonwealth countries, the countries in which the finance ministry has taken a lead role in integrating gender lens in the budgetary process, those experiments sustained. But in the case of outside government initiative, once the donor of that study withdraw, then you don't have any sustainability for such exercises. So if you compare within government exercises and outside government initiatives, within government exercise, to own the process by the country was very important for this exercise to be sustained. So, in nutshell, what I was trying to mention is there are two kinds of experiments on gender budgeting. One is ex ante, the other is ex post. So, ex post is we apply a gender lens to the existing budget and understand the intensity of the gender allocations in the existing budget. And we put forward it as a gender budget statement. And that's a transparent and accountable statement because we can say that how much of the entire spending or how much of the entire budget, India earmarks, not earmarks, spent on women. So that transparency we can, talk about if this gender budget statement is there. But we should not stop at that level because financial inputs analysis is one thing. Linking resources to the results, that is yet another. So, how to link the resources to the results? How we can ensure that this experiment is getting translated into proper, gender-related outcomes. And this measurement issue is quite crucial. And we know that there are different ways in which the gender development is measured in a country. One is the Gender Development Index, which is nothing but a gender disaggregated analysis of the Human Development Index, which is based on education, health, and income. And the education is proxied by the mean years of schooling based on the Barrow and Lee study of NBER. And health is proxied by the life expectancy, and income, that statistical invisibility of what is happening in the unmonetized or the unpaid sector, which we call as unpaid care economy, is not into the income. So when we talk about GDP, there is a huge component which is statistically invisible, and we have many good primary, it's a kind of a new technique of primary survey, which we call as time use survey, in which the chronology of the time is accommodated, and from there a better workforce participation indicator and a better analysis of what's happening in the economy by incorporating what is in the unpaid informal sector and what is paid sector. So these kind of better statistics we can develop from the time use survey. And the good news is we have the second time use survey, and to the 2020, just now the CSO released the time use survey for all the states of India. The earlier time use survey in 2000 was just confined to I think 6 states in India, but now it is for all the states of India. And if some scholars are interested, that unit record level data of the time use survey, not just the aggregate report, but the unit record level data of the time use survey, you can use for your research, just like the way we use the unit utilized data from the NSSO and other kinds of detailed micro level surveys. This time use survey is yet another golden, data set. So we have to use that to analyze what's happening in the unmonetized, informal, unpaid sector. Why I'm saying this? Because if we focus only on what is happening in the economic sector which enters into the GDP, the overall economic well-being of a country will not be, that great. But we incorporate what is happening in the unmonetized sector. If we focus on these two sectors equally, then, from the efficiency perspective, if you ask me, the overall GDP can go up, not GDP, the economic welfare, the concept of economic welfare can go up. So it's from an efficiency perspective. Of course, there is an equity perspective to it, but the moment we talk about neoclassical economists or mainstream economists, they always ask us what is the efficiency perspective in it. So that's why I'm highlighting both equity and efficiency, because given my training, I'm a student from Center for Development Studies. So if you ask me, I don't know about IIM Calcutta economics student, but the mark of a serious student is like, they are, students who focus on economic growth with equity. We don't stop at the level of economic growth, because these are beautiful concerns about the human development perspective and capability crisis. And as Swati rightly pointed out in her introduction, in the times of pandemic, the capability crisis that gets double projected. So unless we focus on the capability deprivation, if we focus just on the economic growth, then we won't get a sustained kind of a development in our country, because economic growth may be happening, but to sustain the economic growth, booming economic growth, we need to have our human capabilities, and the capacity building from a perspective of the capability deprivation is quite relevant. But the constraint within the macroeconomic framework, why things are not happening, because over the years there is a transition from the discretion to the rules-based framework. If you look at the monetary policy, it's based on the inflation targeting. That's a rules-based framework. It may not be the strict Tyler rule, which is articulated in the new monetary framework agreement between RBI and the Government of India. Tyler rule may not be there explicit in that document, but if you look or read closely, it's clearly mentioned that the price stability is the concern of a central bank. So that's based on that inflation targeting. And the inflation targeting in turn is based on your inflationary expectations, the inflation anchor you have in your country, that's 4 plus or minus 2, and also based on the output gap. So if you ask me, can I articulate within the strict monetary macro framework how I am going to incorporate the gender concerns, not even a single central bank governor has thought about, talking about or appreciating gender concerns in the macro monetary framework. But on the other side, in the fiscal, policy authorities, things have changed over the years. I was talking to you about my 2000, the year in which I joined as an economist in an NIPFP. When the project came to an NIPFP, those days, Minister of Finance always thought that gender, this is not my cup of tea, because gender is quite a different microeconomics concern, what it can do with the macroeconomic policy making. So that was an era, but things have moved from there. But it was very difficult for me as an economist, as a beginner, to articulate and to get recognition. So it was my own journey of ups and downs when there was an experiment, a new project given to me when I began my career. Because you can relate this to me, like we all have aspirations. When you join an institute at the career entry level, the projects you handle, that will take you ahead. So how you handle that project, the prospects of that project. So in the American Economic Association conference I went in Atlanta in 2019, last year, there was a panel on gender and economics. What's happening to the efficient women in the field of economics? And in that panel, Professor Janet Yellen was there. She was a former Fed Reserve chairperson, you know that, and now she's a Treasury Secretary, like our finance minister. So there are professors. There were professors. They completely, openly accepted the fact that they feared, a kind of a marginalization if they work on gender issues in economics. So they were not working because unless we work on the macro, more broad topics like the hardcore areas in public finance, for instance, or hardcore areas in monetary, not the mainstream topic. They fear a kind of isolation or that was there, and given a chance, they skipped doing a gender. So it was like articulated as a woman or a woman working on the gender related issues. There was concerns. There were concerns like it's a kind of a marginalization can happen. So all these things are there, but if you ask me, a delta X, like a rate of change has happened from 2000, because prior to that, my seniors or the scholars before me, they have asked the right questions related to the gender and economics. That's why when I began the process, I could get a space to work on, because there was an international working group on not women, the gender and macroeconomics at the heterodox level, because there are two kinds of economists. One is heterodox and the other is the neoclassicals, right? So from the heterodox school of thought, there was a kind of wave to go beyond economic growth, and they were working on it. So in India, in the Ministry of Finance Institute, in the Public Finance Institute, when I was working on gender in fiscal policy, I was feeling lonely. But the moment I went to this group, international working group on gender and macroeconomics, they were articulating it and they were writing papers. It was getting published in the journals. Then there was a kind of taking these theories to the data analysis and to the policy making. So I could feel that there is a working group and I am not alone. So this kind of struggles at the personal levels also, I had to encounter when I worked on the new topic. And another strategy I used is, whenever there was a topic on gender budgeting which I had to speak to the civil service probationers and the youngsters and the university faculty members when they come for public finance training, I requested the program director to give me my macroeconomics topic before I talk about gender budgeting, to ensure audience, because that was a struggle in which it happened, because there was a kind of attention deficit to this topic when we began this process in 2000. So people were not in a mood to listen what is this gender in economics or in fiscal policy. But over the years, there's a kind of awareness that has happened, and now with the ease I am talking to you, when IMF has taken it as a public financial management tool, gender budgeting, as a PFM tool, things became relatively easy. When UN Secretary General, in his high-level panel on women's economic empowerment in 2016, identified gender budgeting as a policy tool to ensure, women's economic empowerment, things became easy. But this was not a story that, it happened it was never easy, because that time getting the recognition for the new topic was very tough. But things happened over the years, because United Nations got a global goal in terms of Millennium Development Goals, not in 2000, much later. So I am speaking about a world in which there was not even global goals like Sustainable Development Goal or Millennium Development Goal. Before that, a kind of economic policy which we grappled with was based on an economic growth paradigm. So to speaking beyond growth was very tough before we got that global goals framework. So that's the point in which we began the process. Now, in many countries, it was an ex post analysis. And when the fiscal decentralization, moved in many countries, fiscal decentralization was a prerequisite for gender budgeting. That is the ex ante experiments. Ex post is you apply gender lens to the existing budgets, but ex ante processes like in Philippines, they moved ahead from the GAD budget because 5% that earmarking, that was not quite relevant. They needed to make it result-oriented gender budgeting. So at the barangays level, barangay means it's like our panchayats. At the barangays level, we, in a cross-country analysis, there was a big cross-country project in NIPFP in 2003-4. That time, we went to the barangays. We, were the part of that analysis in two barangays, in Sosagon and Hilongs, how they do gender budgeting at the ex-ante level. And those experiments, within the decentralized framework, they identified the gender needs. and using many local level functionaries and the institutional mechanism, they try to cost it and integrated that into the budgetary policies. That's a way it has happened at the local level. For instance, in one barangay in Hilongs or in Sosagan, I'm mixing up, in Hilongs. In Hilongs, what has happened is, absence of mother in the home, because mother is going away to city or to another country as a nanny, and the absence of mother in the house was creating some kind of social economic problems in that barangay. So the councillor decided that in order to prevent that from happening, how we can revamp something within our economy, so that we can prevent this, women from traveling abroad to the cities for work to sustain their household. So how to trigger that, what they were doing traditionally there, how to trigger that, because these are the questions which are very relevant in the times of COVID pandemic as well, because how we can trigger what is traditionally happening in our place to avoid exodus of women from the local economy. So what they have done is they revamped the agriculture system. The counselor was not even women in that place, but he gave emphasis to the agriculture sector. So it was a gender budgeting in agriculture sector by revamping irrigation and other kind of details in the agriculture sector, so that women worked in the agriculture field rather than they go abroad. So the absence of mother in the family was the concern of that barangay. In another place in Sosagan, what is happening was that the maternal mortality rate was very high. So they want to make the maternal mortality rate zero. Literally maternal mortality zero in that commune. So they were, it is not a technological revolution in the medical field you require to make the maternal mortality zero, because it's a kind of right, it is like institutional delivery may not be 100% in that barangay, but somebody to attend the delivery and to assist the mother in order to have the post delivery hemorrhage, all these things in which the mortality was getting high. So how we can ensure the proper people to assist women in delivery. So that was another kind of experiment happened there. And some of you must have already read that the maternal mortality rate, if you look at, there are three kinds of delays involved in it. First delay is like women interpreting her illness to her home, that takes little time. Then if the barangay does not have any good roads or a good public transport or any kind of mobility, if it is restricted, then that's a second delay. Then third delay is how she's ensured getting good health care in the hospital. So if you ask me, is it a fiscal question? It is quite a fiscal question related to, investing in proper infrastructure, physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, so that we can reduce the maternal mortality rate. So these were the experiments which were happening at the ex-ante levels, and the fiscal decentralization is quite relevant there. And in the context of India, we have very good ex-ante exercises in the context of Kerala also, because in Kerala, there was a major decision in the fiscal decentralization that finance will be devolved before functions. But usually in the fiscal decentralization experiments, we devolve functions and finance will be devolved only next to that. But in Kerala, that reversal of the sequence of decentralization, that finance first and then functions. So what happened is 40% of the state's plan outlay, that time plan was there, was devolved down to the local bodies. Within that 40% of the plan outlay, they integrated 10% as a gender budgeting. And this 10% is not just ad hoc. Then there will be local level machineries and meetings and consultations in which they identify who are the beneficiaries and what are the real issues, because these are spatial variations. There are spatial variations in identifying what's a need at the local level for men and women. So they identify the needs, and through the consultative process, this 10% of the plan outlay was spent and designed and spent for the program. So that's the way it has happened. And this kind of experiments of doing ex ante gender budgeting is very relevant. If you ask me, the top down cannot have intended outcomes, unless we focus on this decentralized levels. And this concern is there for the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanism also, because gender budgeting is not just confined to public expenditure. It's not just confined to the taxation. Some of the experiments are like giving entitlements for women. If you get the differential rates for registering the property and less rates for women, there may be a tendency that the family will register the property in the name of the woman. So that kind of experiments, that gives entitlement to the woman, and that's giving that gives her a financial empowerment, or at least a social empowerment. So that's the way the taxation side we have dealt with this gender budgeting issue. And another example is like natural resources as a source of taxation is quite relevant in the context of African countries, but we have not yet incorporated natural resources as a source of the big revenue concern. It's a non-tax revenue in the form of royalties we are getting, but not as a part of intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanism. But in many countries, in Kenya, or you take a what do you call it, African country, or even some experiments even within the Western world, this natural resource is part of taxation. But in India, we don't have the natural resources in the tax pool to be devolved down to the local bodies or to the state government. What we call as a tax pool is mainly from the direct and indirect taxes, which is pooled at the center level, and cess and surcharges are deducted, and then whatever is left, we decide on the quantum of devolution, like it was 42% decided by the 14th Finance Commission, and now the 15th Finance Commission's interim report last year, it was effectively 41. It's not a reduction, because always we can say that the Kashmir, one of the states, is now a union territory, so that may be the reason why it was effectively from 42% to 41. And this is devolved down to the state government through a tax transfer formula. It's very scientific, and this tax transfer formula is like various criteria, like we have population, income, distance. So it's based on the per capita income rivers. Then you have, in the terms of reference for the 14th Finance Commission, for the first time ever, climate change was a part of formula. And you can always ask me that if climate change can be the part of terms of reference of a finance commission, why can't the gender related issues be integrated? Because unless these issues are taken up at the top level, the constitutional body level, things won't get effective attention, or the way the prioritized, it may not be prioritized the way it has to be prioritized in our country. For instance, in Australia or in some Pacific countries like Timor-Leste, the status of women's office, that is in the PMO, like, or in the cabinet level, at the top level, like in our prime minister's office. But we cannot even dream like status of women's office will be in the prime minister's in our PMO. So unless we get the attention at the top level, then gender budgeting as a social justice against the atrocities of women and children, or gender budgeting to ensure the kind of capability deprivation, to redress the capability deprivation, that may not happen, because the first thing, we have to get it at the top level to get the priority set. So in the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms, what could be that criteria, or how we can integrate the gender concerns is another question. So when we talk about gender budgeting, it's not just confined to the spending. It is also a taxation question. It's also an IGFT question, like IGFT is intergovernmental fiscal transfer. So maybe one way is that we integrate gender as a criteria in the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, but in the process of correcting the demographic issue, they have incorporated TFR in the interim report of the 15th Finance Commission. So in a way, TFR is a gender-aware variable, right? So in that way, we got little attention, but directly like designing a specific purpose transfer to address gender concerns at the local level must not have happened, like a specific purpose grant to be given to the local level, to address or to strengthen the gender budget initiatives at the local level. So, or, that's not there, but we don't know even a COVID grant will be given to the subnational governments, because right now, the question of revenue uncertainty is so huge. The size of government quantified by expenditure to GDP ratio, the size of government is coming down at the center and the state levels. So when we have concerns of revenue uncertainty, when we have concerns of, not exactly downsizing, the size of government, that public expenditure GDP ratio, it's coming down because we have the fiscal rules. I was talking about the monetary policy side, and like that, you are aware about the fiscal policy rules. Like we have a threshold deficit ratio that has to be maintained at 3%. And in the revenue uncertainty, when taxes are not buoyant, it's going to be through the expenditure compression path. And expenditure compression means it affects the capital infrastructure formation in our country. It affects the human development related spending, but if you ask me, I always wanted debt deficit dynamics to be sorted out differently in the context of COVID pandemic, because if we base our programs and policies based on the revenue certainty, then we are erring on the side of caution, because we don't have money, we don't have fiscal space. So we have to do the pandemic packages in continuum, which is required for the economy, rather than a big stimulus package designed for the country, whether in the form of cash transfers or whether in the form of participation income by people, participating in the economic activity through the employment generation. So this is another debate, like what is more beneficial for Indian economy, whether it is universal basic income, the basic income, or participation income by creating employment opportunities and people participate and earn an income. So there are different questions regarding the nature of fiscal policy or the nature of public policy. But also I need to tell, this is my last statement, the concluding statement is, like a public policy cannot be based on equal opportunity paradigm to ensure gender equality. Because if equal opportunity works well, there are many things. We have good schools, good colleges, many programs, the public good facilities are there in our country. But why, leave nobody behind should be our motto, that LNOB, which is projected as a part of this Sustainable Development Goals. So if leave nobody behind is the motto, then equal opportunity paradigm for the public policy will not work, because there are many unfreedoms for the people. It's not like when things are there we come and access it. So in Amartya Sen's terminology, what are those unfreedoms? We need to remove that, then only people can come and access it. Like if you look at the benefit incidence analysis, like you have a unit cost and unit utilized. If you do the public expenditure benefit incidence analysis, you will be able to understand the distributional impacts of a public spending on rich and poor, or across income quintiles, whether there is an elite capture that the rich income quintiles is accessing, whatever is designed in the economy, or whether it is accessed by, women and men in the Q1. And of course, we cannot deny the intersectionality issues. Because, when we talk about gender as a social justice, if we are blind to the caste related dynamics of what is happening in our economy, we are not getting the complete picture. So the intersectionality should also be given proper emphasis along with income quintiles and the elite capture or whatever it is. So these are the different categories in which we need to understand the inequality issues and tackle. And for that, all women are equal. It's not the homogeneous assumption on which the gender budgeting is built. And of course, by accepting the heterogeneity, we need to float the gender budgeting policies to link the resources to the results. And I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful talk. We welcome students to raise any questions you may have.
May I?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So thank you for the wonderful talk, Professor. So I just have one question because this topic seems very new and emerging. And in the interest of the PhD students who are just beginning and who would like to work, in the areas of public finance or macroeconomic fiscal policy, what do you think are some of the interesting questions, research questions that they can look into, especially related to the gender budgeting? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kranti, for that question. One thing is we need to link the resources to results. So, there is a kind of, vacuum in the existing empirical literature on the public expenditure benefit incidence analysis. And we need more studies on that because right now it's just confined to education and health. But in India, we have only one or two studies on public expenditure benefit incidence analysis. So this will be a good topic for research to understand the distributional impacts. And on the taxation side, tax incidence, there was a study in 2008 and it was led by Pinaki Chakraborty, and it was a cross-country study. And after that, we don't have any good studies on the tax incidence, from through a gender lens. So that could be another wonderful topic to understand, the gender budgeting. Then third is democracy and public expenditure decisions. If students are interested in the public choice literature, the moment you ask a question that why do you vote, whether the gender related preferences, revealed preferences are coming into a picture the moment you decide on the voting pattern. So such kind of questions you can ask, linking the the democracy and the public expenditure decisions. And existing literature, I can cite the in a paper that's a good paper by Dufflo. She asked a question whether the feminization of governance at the local level after the constitutional amendment, we have to ensure 33% of women at the local level. So that feminization of governance led to in integrating the revealed preferences of women into the public expenditure decisions was a question. She was doing a randomized control experiment, and this literature is a part of the Nobel winning literature. And another question, again, I'm giving you example from Dufflo's experiments. She asked a question, immunization is free in our country, but why women are not accessing the immunization? Why they are not taking their babies to the immunization camps to access it? So her experiment was conducted on the basis in which the control camps she provided lentils. And of course, she got the result that the women responded to the camps where the lentils were provided. But as a public policy imperative, lentil may not be a good policy tool for a long term, to ensure the agency in women. That question is still, it's partial. But these kind of experiments, randomized control experiments, are conducted to understand, also the intra household bargaining power. Like women are participating in the gender budgeting policies of the government, especially in terms of the financial empowerment, the credit-linked programs of government, whether that led to increase in the intra-household bargaining power, or that the gender and say that topic, that paper by Kaushik Basu in Economic Journal. Here I am not getting now, but you can read that. It's a wonderful paper on gender and say, SAY. Like it's the Economic Journal. It's written by Kaushik Basu. It's theoretical as well. And you can try that question empirically also, whether the access to the fiscal programs, whether that leads to strengthening the intra-household bargaining power of men and women. That's another kind of question you can look into. Then I already, as I mentioned, time use survey. That's a very good data set. You can look into the question that, your country may have a wonderful employment policy, but women are time poor. And this time poverty can affect income poverty. So in what all ways in which the time poverty is affecting income poverty? These studies, if you want to have, these kind of similar studies, you can check Levy Economic Institute website. They have a good program on gender and macroeconomics. And there are many papers there related to the time poverty and how the, while tackling the deficiency of infrastructure in a place, that can lead to, the release of the women's time, and they will be available for working in the paid sector. So these are the quick research questions coming to my mind. And of course, if you're interested in the econometric kind of modeling, then of course you can start, because this was floated in our country in 2004, gender budgeting. So now it's a time to look econometrically also the impact of the gender budgeting on gender outcomes sectorally. So one paper is there, IMF paper by Stolsky. She looked into the gender parity in education, the impact of gender budgeting on gender parity in education. So similar questions can be asked econometrically using panel models or, time series. We won't be able to, because it's only just 2004. So that time series may not be a good proposition, but you can look into the panel kind of work across sectors over time, or even the subnational gender budgeting experiments and how it has impacted on, various outcomes. Kranti, these are the questions, coming to my mind.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ma'am, there's next question from Nikhil. Is gender budgeting focused on inequality alone? Also, as he understood it as it entails more social factors than economic factors.
Okay, Nikhil, no, it's both social and economic. Because gender budgeting, if you look at the existing allocations, if you recategorize based on economic and non-economic, maybe you are right that the programs are still designed in our country, maybe 70% in the form of reinforcing the existing gender stereotype, but the rest 30%, it's coming up, but it's not everything. It's coming up as economic programs as well. For instance, one is financial inclusion. The second is like energy infrastructure, like providing support for the women in energy policy. So there are instances in our country in which we are focusing more on the economic issues. And of course, gender inequality is an economic issue. It's not just a social issue alone. So this gender budgeting is not looked into from a social perspective. It is looked into from a macroeconomic perspective. And why this confusion has happened, I think, Nikhil, the existing budgetary allocations are just to reinforce the stereotypic roles of women. That may be the confusion you had. But, there are programs which ensure the economic role of women, like ensuring the economic empowerment of women. And Nikhil, you have any supplementary questions, or, am I clear?
Just one more thing. So in India, when you're speaking with respect to India, do we also have programs on eliminating the wage gap between that exists between genders? Because many countries have that.
Obviously, that's a crucial question, because in the developed countries, the moment we talk about the gender budgeting, the gender wage gap is one of the prime concerns. But in our country, we are still grappling with revising the minimum wages, and we don't have any parity between urban and rural wages. And this wage gap as a proper concern for the gender budgeting, that's just confined to the Western world. And in India, we have not taken up this as a crucial thing at all. What has happened in India is we are focusing on health, we are focusing on education, but even in the labor force participation, Nikhil, not from the gender disparity in wages, but from the economic participation of women in labor market, that itself, we don't have proper policies. Because when we analyzed the impact of gender budgeting on the labor force participation across men and women, we are not getting a strong results, because to ensure women in the workforce, we need to have care economy infrastructure on board. But we have not, begun in that lines to think about what are the care economy infrastructure which support women to be on the workforce. So, that concern itself is there. So more than wages, how to ensure the participation of women in economic activity itself is a concern. And we don't have much visible policies on care economy infrastructure. But wage gap, of course, I agree that it's a crucial concern. And I worked on gender budgeting in the developed countries in Canada and in Sweden, and there, this is taken up as an important issue, the wage gap disparities, and it is a crucial issue. But we are focusing more on ensuring the economic force participation of women, and you're getting the point, right?
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Any other question?
Ma'am, I have a couple of questions. Ma'am, like one is a bit of a clarificatory question. So, is there any kind of an accountability mechanism from, say, a CAG, both at the central level as well as at the local level, in terms of understanding whether there is a gender budgeting framework in place, or how much are they adhering to those norms? Is there any such mechanism which exists?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. A CAG is looking into gender budgeting exercises. One is, you must be knowing that we have this problem of fiscal marksmanship issues in India, right? Because what we promise in the budget, that budgetary estimates, then after 1 year, when it is RE, when it is revised, and when the actual expenditure, when we report, there's a huge deviation between BERE and actual. So in the CAG reports, we are able to understand what are the reasons for this deviation between what is promised or what is budgeted and what is actual. So this fiscal marksmanship is a big concern. But in the CAG reports, this deviation is not partitioned. Why the fiscal forecasting errors, or at the sectoral levels, at the gender budgeting levels, why the program is announced, why it was underutilized, or why it is not utilized, and what are the reasons. So this can be analyzed technically by partitioning the errors into the bias of the policymaker, and whether it is due to random factors. So this analysis is just confined, researchers have done that, but this analysis is just confined to the macro fiscal variables. And at the central government level, more or less, we are getting the result that it is because of the random factors that this fiscal forecasting error happens. And NIPFP, we have done, Pinaki has, done a study. We worked with him on this fiscal marksmanship analysis of the subnational governments. And, in the case of subnational governments in some states, the policymakers, bias is also getting into it. But usually, Fiscal Council is an independent agency which look into this accountability. It may be a parliamentary body, but as you said, what our CAG is doing is they highlight why there is a deviation between the budget and the actual. So CAG reports provide that. That's there. And what's the reason? Other than that, what you mentioned is a whether that framework is properly, that analytical metrics and that institutional mechanism, whether that framework is properly followed, that kind of a meticulous accountability exercised by the CAG is not there. But of course, they look into the variations or the deviations between what is budgeted and what is actual, what is promised and what is real. So that's there. Otherwise, it's an outside government mechanism in which people do an expenditure tracking analysis. That happened mostly outside the purview of CAG or finance ministry, because it's a social audit also, and also individual like a research institute getting into the expenditure tracking analysis to find the flow of funds and what are the different impediments in that flow, and why it was not translated fully, or what are the issues with the state capacity to utilize that money fully. These are the kind of things happen outside the purview of finance ministry of CAG. That's it. When I was talking about gender budgeting as a fiscal innovation, the knowledge networking part, it was quite successful. Institutional design and the analytical matrices were very clear. That clarity was there. Capacity building level, if you ask me, that third phase is still a mixed phase, because you can understand that the set of people whom you impart training, they may not be there after 4 years or 5 years. Then it's an infusion of new set of people. So that turnover ratio, that's quite high, and we need to do this on a sustained basis. And fourth part is what exactly your question is, the accountability related to this fiscal innovation, and that needs to be strengthened. So long, CAG is doing this, identifying why there was a deviation, but at the macro level, but not more than that as an accountability, not any checklist or anything which is on board, in which we can do a very rigorous analysis of whether it's done or not. Hemadri.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another follow-up question. So, like more in terms of, maybe say some challenges regarding gender budgeting. I just wanted to know your views on that. So, for example, India follows this cash budgeting kind of a framework, right? Now, in such a situation, is there scope for some kind of fiscal opportunism? Say, for example, over the years, as we see in the last few years, the total expenditure from the government side has been declining. So is there a possibility under the garb of cash budgeting framework that the government actually try and design schemes adhering to gender budgeting norms, and instead miss out on some more priority expenditure?
I need a clarification. You are under the assumption that a government may design gender budgeting programs and miss out other priority allocations. You mean to say, you just clarify that, you mean to say that it's a least priority one?
Ma'am, not really.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
tell
what,
me.
for example, for example, the government doesn't have the wherewithal to say have expenditure, say for the capital investment or the infrastructure, and say there are elections round the corner, and government instead designs policies which are in favor of, say, a more gender parity framework in terms of the budget, and accordingly designs its budgetary mechanism. So in that scenario, is there a scope for some kind of fiscal opportunism?
Oh, you mean to say that it's a clientele kind of a expenditure pattern in which you woo the voters, right?
Exactly.
Okay. But, if you look at that kind of pattern, you can see this freebies and all in subnational levels, maybe in Tamil Nadu, where, there is a kind of a clientele related public spending to woo the voters. That's there. But, otherwise, if you look at, gender budgeting is not providing freebies. It is an acceptance that there is a capability deprivation in the economy, and you have to understand and accept it. And this is getting aggravated because there's a kind of, stereotype notion of division of labor at the household level, and this is getting into the dual work burden of a woman, and that's reason for the loss of talent and loss of insights in the economy, because she has to quit or she may not be there. Where are the efficient women? So there are many concerns. The question before asked by Nikhil on the wage disparity, and these are all closely related questions. So the concern of gender budgeting is that it's not a clientele or a freebie kind of a spending. It's much more than that, accepting the capability deprivation that is happening from a kind of legacies and a kind of unfreedoms that is, spilling over for for a longer period of time, in which we cannot think that it will be handled within the household anymore. A public policy has a role to play this, because these are social prejudices, but we cannot say that discrimination against a girl child, which happens even before her birth in our country, is a social prejudice and it will be handled by the household decision alone. What is the role of the public policy in ensuring that such things are not encouraged in our country? So you may be thinking that the public policy or a fiscal policy tool may not be the in entirety can do this, but certain things can be done using the fiscal policy. And what exactly is that? These are the bigger questions, because if you ask me what is a pressing question on gender in our country, I will say that it's a discrimination against women that starts even before birth. And these kind of issues, whether through the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms or whether through the fiscal policies, if we can address it, we have to do that. So that's my clarification, Himadri, that it's not a clientele-related spending at all. It's much more than that, that ensuring equal opportunity because of no fault of a person, that person should not be denied access to education or access to health. Like when the economy progresses, that inequality which is mounting, that at the receiving end, the vulnerable groups are at the receiving end. So the role of public policy is not to ensure, the expenditure on the basis of equal opportunities, but based on the paradigm in which something is preventing from a vulnerable group of population from accessing it, and how you can frame policies to remove that unfreedom so that everybody can own and participate in the economy. So the unit of analysis of such exercises are intra-household. Like when the moment you design a fiscal policy, if the unit of analysis is household, then intra-household inequalities are not taken into consideration. For example, nutrition. If you look at the nutritional assignment at the household level, maybe the household level, it's above, they must have attained that. But if you look at the women in that household, maybe, the nutritional attainment for her, she may be anemic. So many social policy, if you look at the intra-household level, when it is a unit of analysis, the inferences are quite different than when you confine your analysis at the household level. So that's what, and it's not at all a clientele based public spending, but it's based on an awareness that it's a capability deprivation. Yeah, in that maybe Kranti was also asking me about the research questions. Maybe you can read the London School of Economics one paper by Meghna Desai. He used that capability deprivation framework of Amartya Sen, in which he identified the capabilities, functionings, and commodity space. And that's a beautiful kind of an analytical framework to do ex-ante gender budgeting. All the rights they identified under the capabilities, and functioning is what you foresee as the the data. Using the data, you can get at the disaggregated level to understand whether the capabilities are translated into functionings. And in the commodity space, what Meghna Desai was articulating was the commodity space in terms of the public policy. So for us, it's a fiscal policy. So when you translate this framework, what are the existing programs for women or men for that matter, and what ought to be the budget which can address all these capability deprivation? This may be different. that can be one thing in which we can capture. Himatri, you have to clarify that somehow I think you're getting the notion that gender budgeting is a clientele-based spending. Is it so?
Actually, like my
Yeah.
notion, I mean, I don't have that kind of a notion as such, but
Okay.
like, I mean, it's not. I'm against this concept. My framework was like, I mean, the governments often use, I mean, various forms to kind of, uh, I mean, woo the voters, as you rightly pointed out. So, I mean, this could be a mechanism. I mean, for example, we know about, say, the state government of West Bengal. They have certain initiatives like Shri West Bengal and all those stuff. So those are probably in lines with gender budgeting. But I mean, more often than not, they are often used in terms of getting votes than in terms of implementation. So
Yeah,
that,
we
I mean,
can
with that,
check this out. Yeah, we can check this out because the sustainability of the program, the intention and the sanctity of the program can be questioned. But more or less at the center government level, that energy infrastructure, the kind of policies they framed, it was not a clientele-based policy, because there are studies in which the political economy of public spending is done. And you may be interested in seeing this paper by Stanley Weiner, Pinaki Chakraborty, and Bharat. They have looked into this question, but of course not from the gender perspective, but they looked into the question whether India, not from the gender, but in any kind of a clientele spending, or what's the political economy of the public spending before elections, whether there's a spurt in the public spending. So this political economy of public spending has been studied, and they couldn't find any strong clientele-based spending pattern. But what they identified is the fiscal rules and the the FRBM, right? That was quite a powerful determinant of the public expenditure decisions. That's the way it came up. And another study I remember by Shugata Das Gupta of JNU, he got a double PhD from MIT and University of Chicago, Shugata Das Gupta. So he has written a paper in Journal of Development Economics looking into the political economy, the quest which you are concerned about, whether there's a kind of a clientele-based spending to woo the voters, what is the electoral pattern. So what he has done is he's taken the public spending based on the different electoral or the different political regimes. Then he controlled it for the year before the elections, then looked into this question, and also he has incorporated the fiscal transfers. I think, if my memory is correct, I think he's getting an answer about the grants to the subnational governments. And the grants, it was grants to subnational governments, there was a spurt prior to the elections, but the volatility could not do wonders at the local level because the grants were tied. Because if the grants are tied, then flexibility of finance at the local level is not quite rich. So you can look into these questions, but from the gender perspective, so far, all what I'm getting is that freebies which happened in Tamil Nadu. Other than that, but if you look at what's the quantum of such kind of freebies in the entire, budget allocation, maybe it's like 0.0001% in terms of magnitude. But whatever seriousness in terms of gender budgeting happened is entirely different. It is not exactly the clientele thing. But you reminded me another question, because I was talking about the transfers from the center to the subnational governments, but there could also be gender aware transfers from the center to directly to the household, like in the form of cash transfer. There your concern is quite relevant, whether this cash transfer to the household when a girl child is born, it's given for the entitlement of education and health for the girl children. But that amount was not given at the time of birth. It will be given to the household only when the girl attains, I think, 16 or 18 years old or something like that. But there are studies which showed that the cash transfers were not used for the education or health entitlements of the girl child. It was rather used as a dowry. So, but that doesn't mean that we need to stop designing cash transfers for girl children, but it has to be that implementation has to be in a different way. But it does not mean that we cannot run away from a pressing question that discrimination against women starts even before birth in our country. So the fiscal policymakers cannot close their eyes and sit to this question when this question is so relevant that we need to address this issue. But how you address this issue, what are the implementation issues, whether it's becoming a clientele related voter wooing process, these are questions and we need to control for that. But we cannot say no to a promising framework as gender budgeting, because it's a very good fiscal policy tool to ensure things. But the concerns you pointed out are real, but that needs to be tackled rather than saying no to a promising framework. That's my take. What do you say?
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, tell me. Yeah, Hemadri.
Ma'am, I absolutely concur with you. So it's like fine.
Okay, these were only 2 questions you had for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Hello. I have just one more question, ma'am. Since you mentioned female labor force participation, I mean, this is Nikhil this side.
Yeah, Nikhil.
So actually, I wanted to ask your opinion on where, how much progress has been made on that front? Because a couple of years back, I read a report that even though the economy was growing, it was growing at that time. Now we are in a recession. The female labor force participation had come down, and in the areas we had it higher in the rural areas, and that was chiefly because we had more of self-employment and disguised unemployment in rural areas. So that is why female participation was high. So I just want to ask, is there emphasis on that? How are we doing there? And are there checks and balances in place to ensure this goes up?
Wonderful. These are real concerns because, we had a study on this, the fiscal transfer to ensure the employment, that is NREGA, right? Whether there is any state differentials or gender differentials in that. And that's an NIPFP paper. And, exactly your concern, like in say, many states, in spite of, there is a job guarantee scheme on board that women, especially women, they have not come and accessed it. And the reasons for that were asked in the, NSSO rounds. And, reasons were like, they don't have anyone at home if they come and work there. It's a care economy burden. Like they have a lot of burden at the household, and they don't have time to come out and work. That was an important concern. And second is a prejudice, like the kind of activity which we provided through the NREGA was the public works. So whether the public works, that's a nature of work that women look forward and come out and work. So these were the concerns. So the menu of activities, we need to streamline a bit to get women's participation ensured. That's one. And also we have done a kind of an econometric study in which a feminization view is happening. Like what is feminization view? When the economy progresses, initially there could be a decline in the female labor force participation, but later on it can go up. So at the macro level in Turkey, in some countries, we could find a feminization U-turn because the women participating in the export processing zone was contributing to that, the U-turn. But in India, we are not getting a clear result that there is a feminization U. If you work it out across, in a panel across, different states over the years, you are not getting a feminization U in the context of the female workforce participation. And there are policies on board, but if you frame only employer of last resort policies without ensuring this care economic infrastructure, you won't get the women to work for them, because it's not just the social norms, It's not just the inhibitions of the woman, it is a pure time poverty that's preventing the women from accessing the market related work. And that's an important concern, and we need to have more policies on the care economy so that the female workforce participation will go up. That's the inference. It's not inhibitions, or it's not related to social norms that women are not accessing. Like there is a constraint in the care economy, the time poverty issue, which we have to look into. Yeah, that's it, Nikhil.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions anyone has?
Ma'am, I just have a very small clarificatory question. You mentioned time use survey, which is the unit level data is generally available on the MOSPI or ICSSR site, but the latest 2020 time use survey unit level data I couldn't find anywhere. So,
oh yeah, I'm also searching for that. I think we need to talk to that concerned person in MOSPI. Maybe you can talk to the IAM librarian. That's what I have done. I have asked the NIPFP librarian whether we can get, because last time what we have, it was one-to-one meeting, and we got it in the CD-ROM that they just gave us the data. But I think there's a procedure over there, because it's not, you are right, it's not publicly available, the unit record data. It's only the broad aggregate tables are there, publicly available. But it's a very good data set. We must do something using that. One thing is like workforce participation rates through the labor survey and the other kinds of employment and employment survey. You get a different figure than the labor force participation you arrive from the time you survey. The things will be more, clear and complete when you use the time you survey. And the chronology of the time, that's very important to understand when you design the policies for women, because if we don't understand the chronology of the time and the time poverty, we won't be able to design policies properly, especially in the case of the energy infrastructure or in the case of the water budgets. And in Morocco, in the communes level, there was a beautiful study by the Ministry of Finance. They want the girl child to be in school. They want to improve the enrollment of the girl children. But when they increased the education budgets, they could not translate that into outcome. But when they realized that ensuring clean water for the household was primarily the responsibility of that small girl, and that's why she could not be authentic and she could not go to the school, but she was ensuring clean water for the house. So they increased the water budgets and got the girls' enrollment up in Morocco. So that was a beautiful study. So we need to find out this complementary fiscal services and these inferences we get from the chronology of time, and how, because it's a systems of national accounts question. Like in 1993, United States, Statistical Division, they recognized this issue and extended the protection boundary to get this economic activity also into the, GDP, but not to say that GDP will go up, but to keep at satellite accounts, just like the way we do the green accounting or environmental accounting. There was a seminar last day in MOSPI. I think that details are there on the web. I attended that meeting yesterday. So like that green accounting or climate accounting, there's a kind of statistical invisibility related to the care economy also. It's not to use any pricing methodologies on to get our GDP up, but to say that, this statistical invisibility, we need to acknowledge and accept and frame public policy so that the workforce participation of the women can go up. So that's a recognition. Kranti.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Is there any other question? Otherwise, we can. Anyone has any question? Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful talk and engaging with all our questions. Personally, I really appreciate, as a young women research scholar, for sharing with us from your personal experience regarding marginalization of certain topics in economics and how the stereotypes attached to some of these topics prevent people like us from exploring relevant but relegated issues. But as you said, since there is some marginal change towards more positive way, I think that gives us some hope. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Swati. Thank you so much.